Here. I'm Onwudiwe.
I'm Riley.
So we're actually both with Halv, and we're co-chairs of this whole symposium, the Harvard Legal Tech Symposium. It's the first time we ever did it. We're super excited thus far, the events we've had. The first two events we did the last couple of days were law term focused. We had the head of innovation of Wilson Sonsini, head of practice management, Wilmer here, all these different people talking from a law firm perspective. Today, the symposium kind of shifts towards a different version, which is in-house. So today we're going to be talking about contracts. Tomorrow we've got a panel of general counsel and technologists talking about technology in law firms. There's also going to be in legal departments. There's also going to be a happy hour tomorrow at 5 if you're interested, and then one more panel on Friday. So we both with Evisort, we can just talk a little bit about what we do with the company, and then we're going to take you through a couple quick slides, show you a demo, just so you have an idea of what the technology is, what we've developed. We're going to then go through a case study that was, we got copies up here. It's just an excerpt. It's not released yet. It was done by Professor, what's his name? Yeah. I think it was Liam, but it was a professor at Columbia Business School who's been working on this with us. And we got some excerpts from you from one of the use cases there. So after that, we actually have the CEO of Evisort, who just graduated from HLS last year, Jerry King, who was nice enough to fly in from our office in Silicon Valley. So we're gonna truncate things just so at the end we can bring him up, ask him a couple questions, and have that kind of discussion. So you can start, just tell a little bit what you do with Evisort and as a 3L,
Yeah, awesome. So like MbaMemme mentioned, we actually started here at Harvard Law School. Jerry and his co-founder Jake were the ones who had the idea for the company, and then MbaMemme and I had the opportunity to join. We'll actually be working for Evisort full time when we graduate. So it's been a really cool and fun journey. MbaMemme works a lot on the business development side of things, and I get to work on our product side. So actually, our product manager for the company. But it's been really, really exciting, and we've had a lot of support from the law school and a lot of alumni. And we actually just did our second round of funding just this past month. So things have gone really well, and we've got to learn a lot about how technology and AI in particular can help out businesses, law firms, as they think about how do we deal with our contracts and all the data that's inside of it. So just quickly, before we jump into the case study, I wanted to give a little bit of background. The case study actually is really long, and so we decided to give you guys just a couple pages because we don't want you to read too much. We'd rather just make this more of a discussion. But just to frame what you guys are going to be looking at in 2 seconds, and if you haven't already, feel free to go to that link and the link here, because that's where you can access those case study pages. We also have paper copies here, so we'll hand those out in a second. But just to give a little bit of background on why we made the company and what we do, we're an AI company, but really we're focused on contracts and streamlining the processes around how do we get the data, the most important data, out of contracts. And traditionally, this is something that was done by probably like us when we first graduated from law school. We go in-house at a law firm, and we are reviewing lots of contracts and doing due diligence and copying and pasting and putting things in spreadsheets. And it was actually Jerry's initial thought. He's working at a junior banker because they do a lot of the same things, that hey, this could be done using artificial intelligence. And so we've developed a SaaS software as a service platform that takes AI and replaces some of that manual, tedious work that otherwise is delegated to folks like ourselves, junior lawyers and junior folks in businesses. And we work across industries. We work with all different types of companies, from some of the biggest telecommunications companies in the country down to a small engineering firm in North Dakota. Anyone that uses contracts has a need for AI potentially.
Yeah, so the best part about this story is that it was founded by 2 students from Harvard Law School. So right now we're working kind of part-time as 3Ls, but Jerry and Jake, they actually, after graduating just last year, they didn't take the bar. They went straight to Silicon Valley and opened up an office in San Carlos, where right now data team's down there, while our computer science team and us are down here in the Boston office downtown. So those two met a data scientist from Uber. He actually led the team that made the Uber Express pool, Amin Aoun from MIT. And we also have Tom Hoover, who joined more recently, but he's older on the team. As you can tell, we're a pretty young team, and he was one of the first 10 people at Dropbox as an engineer, kind of leading up our team there. So we started in 2016. To date, we've got several clients that span different kinds of departments within companies, and I think that's one thing we want to talk about today is the fact that the information in contracts, it's not just legal that needs this. Sales, marketing, accounting, all the contracts really kind of like the workflow of a company, of all its obligations and what it needs to do. So when you're accessing data in them, you've got to think a little bit past legal.
Yeah, so just at a really high level, this is kind of how our technology works. And as MbaMemme mentioned, it was sort of a meeting of the minds between folks here at the law school and folks over at MIT who have expertise in advanced machine learning and data analytics to come up with this solution to this problem that we're talking about, which is how do we get our data out of contracts without spending a ton of man-woman hours. The first step is because contracts are typically, they used to be stored as paper, right? And now a lot of companies have started transition to digitizing those documents. But even still, they're stored typically as PDFs. Most of the companies that MbaMemme and I talk to on a regular basis store their documents that way. And it's really, it's rare to hear that folks have documents that are stored as Word docs in a searchable way. So a problem that maybe we didn't anticipate early on was how much time we should have to spend figuring out how do we preserve the content in contracts in a way that it becomes searchable so that AI models can go in and start reading those contracts for themselves and extracting data. And that's actually the second step, is the AI actually can analyze the language within contracts once it's in a machine-readable form. And that's actually really cool. And when we spend time with our data scientists, it feels almost magical, the things that the AI is able to do. If you give it enough training data, an algorithm can actually parse through complex contracts and find the kinds of things that you might be looking for as a junior lawyer. It's just a matter of training it in such a way that it can recognize the different nuances and formats of contracts because they vary across different businesses, law firms, etc. And so once the AI reads the contract, it can start pulling out the most important information. And we found that companies track all sorts of different things, but there are certain core pieces of data that pretty much every company in legal department, finance, procurement department care about. Things like pricing information. What's owed to me as a company if I have payments due? How do I make sure that I stay on top of those? How do I match the invoices that I'm receiving to what the language and the terms of the contract say? Things like who are the parties to my contracts? If I need to find a contract that I did 5 years ago with a company that's stored in my mess of folders and documents stored on my shared drive, how do I find that specific folder if I don't have parties assigned to each contract? Things like dates, key dates. How do I stay on top of when my contracts are going to expire so that I don't miss an expiring contract just because of this volume of the contracts that I have? And what we've tried to do is take all that data and put it in a platform that is really accessible for lawyers and other execs and other folks inside businesses. These are, go ahead.
So this is just some of the information that we've been working with our partners and extracting from their contracts like up until today. So right now this is something geared more towards legal, but for example we are working with Cox Automotives, and it's their supply chain team, and they've got 40 different data points of financial information they want extracted from all of their contracts. So we work to do custom use cases for companies that have particular things they need out of their contracts. But these are kind of just some of our out-of-the-box solutions that'll just work on any type of contract. And when we're building out algorithms, it's a great experience because you've got the legal folks on the team, Jake, Jerry, Riley, and I, who kind of know it from a legal perspective. You've got the data science people who are looking at how this data can be gone through and parsed out, and then we've got people in the Philippines, people in Croatia who are working on building out platforms for this, and then also kind of building out that training data set. So it's also, when working with training data, I get messages at 8 p.m. every day from the Philippines, from people waking up over there, like setting up training data, and we've got to be looking through and making sure that it's something that can be built out to a viable product. I think Riley's just going to go through and... So
what we're going to do now is, if you have had a chance to get that link and access the case study, and that's great. If you don't, then maybe you can just raise your hand and we can hand out some of these paper case studies. They're pretty, like I said, they're relatively short, so just take a second to read through them. They go through some of the problems that we have encountered as we work with different companies of different types to solve some of the problems that we're talking about. And we want to just look at this and sort of give you guys a chance to read through this and start thinking about the problems, and then we can talk about, how you guys think we could maybe solve them, and we can talk about the solutions that we've developed for particular clients.
Okay, it looks like people are just about done reading. Thanks for going through that. Once again, that was a draft, kind of a supplement to that case that's being built out. But once that's completed, we'll definitely be sharing that. Just keep checking our website. We just wanted to start kind of with the question. We want to make this kind of interactive, you know, feel free to answer questions. If someone says something you want to comment on, you know, pretend this is business school for a little bit. You know? So just, you know, and this is for both the, you know, both of the use cases that you read through. I'm just wondering if anyone had any ideas about how you would approach tackling these issues without the use of artificial intelligence or machine learning solutions. If there's any, you know, practicing lawyers in the house now who are maybe dealing with this kind of consistently right now, it's also a good time. Oh, yeah?
From someone who doesn't know too much about technology and AI, like my initial hunch would be to like perhaps we should start tagging all these documents, but that seems like a very like cumbersome way to go about organizing the documents.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. And who would you have tagging that? Would you have kind of the legal staff there, hire some outside people, maybe get paralegals, or is there any idea?
I feel like there should be outside contractors now, like somewhere not in the United States who can do this kind of work. That would be my opinion.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Any other ideas?
I've gone through similar cases, and what we do is get a bunch of boxes in one room, a bunch of paralegals and junior associates, and just go through contracts, divide them like in major categories, and then write down terms for each of them. And yeah.
That's great. So yeah, what you just saw are two solutions that a lot of, and we're on the phone with general counsel and CLOs almost every day, and this is what people are doing to solve these issues. There's the one, you know, bring it to an outside provider. A lot of people have set up kind of teams in India in several cases where you're just sending lots of documents there for people, you know, to go through and pull out this data. And some issues there is one, it's the same quality issue that you're going to be, you know, thinking about when you have, especially there it might be a little bit less skilled, but in any case, when you've got a human going through hundreds upon thousands of, you know, repetitive work, people get tired. Each one they're looking at they're not approaching it the same way, you know, as you get tired and you keep doing the same kinds of things. And then another solution we've seen is kind of like you were describing, taking it in-house to an in-house law firm, because, you know, law firms are kind of made for this. They have so many young, budding lawyers who know this kind of, you know how to go through contracts and can really have the work power to be doing that. But as you know, I mean, we're expensive, you know, so that's getting billed out even with someone doing that level of work that is just going through contracts and reading. You're paying high fees to have, you know, someone in a law firm be doing that for you. Do you want to ask them? Okay, cool. So yeah, just getting out of that. And is there any other kind of solutions about taking this not AI? Cool. So I guess, and right now we're gonna just look at the Pacific example that we had talked about in there. I guess, is there are there any kind of risks that you think they're particularly scared of? I know in that example they talked about that people that they're trying to merge with and work with don't want to because of the way that they've been doing loan documents and kind of their whole system in general around managing documents up until that point. And I'm wondering, are there any particular risks you guys can think of which would make a scare potential merging partner to merge with them?
I guess a different way to ask that would be, in a M&A due diligence context, what would be some red flags that you see in a contract where that might change either the stock price or hold the deal back? I think the LLM is probably a good idea on that question.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes in contract you have like change of control provisions, and this is like, you know, very important when you want like go for an AD, because if the control of the company changes, then you can not rely on that contract. You lose the deal basically. So that kind of provisions are.
Yeah, I was on a deal. I worked in banking before summer. I was on a deal where we went up to 220 buyers because we couldn't get past 80. And it was because it was a large supply chain contract. Every supplier had a change of control provision. So if you bought the parent organization, you actually might not have a business underneath that. So we had to recontract with every supplier. That's an example of a $1 billion consequence.
I think if you guys can put on the business hat for a second, if you're a company thinking about merging with Pacific, and you have maybe a company like Pacific that doesn't have a great grasp on what's out there in their contracts because of the way it's unstructured, and you have another company that has organized things diligently for like the past couple decades, so they have a really good record of all of the terms of each of their loans across the organization, and maybe there's some standardization in terms of the way that they do that. And the other example that they give is employment agreements. For the good company, maybe that's we have a standard employment agreement that we give out. For Pacific, it's kind of ad hoc, right? So what would concern you about going with Pacific, and why might you like going with this other fictional company better, given the state of play vis-a-vis their contracts?
I mean, I guess if I'm acquiring a company, I'm guessing this is a small union, so you can acquire instead of merging, then you would want to potentially like buy and then increase its profitability. But as of right now, it seems like every loan is ad hoc, and there doesn't seem to be a pattern or like a solution as to how you would increase that in the future. Because you did say in the case that like the profit of now is a little bit pressure, and then the question would be like, how am I going to solve that? But then if I don't have enough data or patterns to kind of like analyze, then how am I going to go about solving that problem?
What's the kind of data that you think would be important for, say, a loan contract, loan document, or an employment agreement, either one?
Loan contract, I think, would be interest rates, terms. I don't know, is like the interest rate fixed or is it variable? Do we have any other collateral provisions in the contract?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Because I mean, what those terms are telling you is really the value of that loan. It's what steps do we have to take to get the value from that loan, and what are in these loans. So when you have a company like the fictional company where in every single loan, this is the interest rate, this is how long it takes to expire, these are the ways to renew it. When that's consistent throughout all of them, you know exactly what you're getting into. But if you're trying to acquire a company and within their own internal documents, it's just staggered and varies a lot. And even with the employment, you don't know if you can fire someone, if that's going to have ramifications because they negotiated something in there about kind of a parachute payment that someone else doesn't get. And it just makes it a lot riskier doing business with that company and acquiring them, because at the end of the day, what you're acquiring is defined by the contractual obligations they have to others. And if those aren't clear, then it just makes the process of trying to go and standardize it can be difficult, and then just, doing the typical diligence that we're often going to be brought in to help out with can just be made a lot more messy. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the themes that really stand out in these case studies is one, like from an efficiency standpoint, how do we find specific contracts when we want to find them? And so for MbaMemme gave the example of the employee that gets fired. And if all employment agreements are the same, then you know exactly what your obligations are in that termination context. But if they're ad hoc, then you have to go find that specific employment agreement. And how do you do that? If this employee was hired 10, 15 years ago, they may not have a copy of their employment agreement still. You may not have that either, or you at least not have it readily available. So efficiency in terms of how do I find what I'm looking for when I need it. I think the second one is how do I evaluate the viability of my business? If my loan documents are standard across all the folks that we work with, then I have an idea of when I'm going to be paid and the advantages that I have through those documents. But if they're ad hoc, then it's really hard to get a sense of the value of this business. And it works sort of because the individual loan officers get to negotiate the terms that help them get the deal done. But from an executive standpoint, how do I know if I need to change the way that we're doing business because I really have no insight into my contracts. And as the last one I think I would point out is risk. And this goes for both examples, but how do I know if there is, for example, in the case of the inventors den, if some data breach with one of the companies that is under our umbrella, how do I know what my obligations are to the different vendors and other and counterparty organizations that we work with? And how do I evaluate that across my company? Anything to add?
Yeah, just for that last example, it would be like there's a lot of companies who sometimes they'll negotiate when they're working with you, especially with the new data breach notification kind of rules set out there, GDPR. They'll say, hey, if you have a data breach, I need to be contacted within 30 days. And that might be in some of your contracts and not all of them. So imagine you're a company that has hundreds of thousands of contracts and you suffer a data breach. And that wasn't one of the manual fields you've had your people, because that's the thing, even though you have people keeping track of things, they're not keeping track of everything, only keeping track of what the need to haves, because that's what you would be paying for them to do. So if you didn't have someone keeping track of every single contract that either yes or no did or didn't have a data breach, then you've got a fire drill on your hands where you're going to have an expensive process with a law firm, or you're going to take that internally and really just kind of bootstrap it. I think one more kind of thing to go through, with the inventors den, I think one issue, just to note on this real quick before moving forward, is especially when you have two different people, as it was in that example where each independently getting contracts signed, it's just you're not able to benchmark. So perhaps you went in with a printing company, one person did, and then someone else did a different printing company for their business unit. You're not able to negotiate. You're not able to, if you're doing that independently, you don't have a cohesive kind of 500-foot view of your contracts. You're able to say, I'm paying this guy this much to do my printing over here for my sales team. I think this office down here in New York should negotiate to do something similar. We'll use that. So by using past agreements to benchmark prices, you can really help your negotiating position, and that can be lost if you don't know kind of past things that you've been negotiating. I think just one more question over here. I guess two more questions. One, this isn't just a legal issue for both of these. Can you guys think of some other parties in the other business units, sales, marketing, just the executive C-suite who might be affected by some of these issues in the two use cases?
Yes, financials, like you would have to have somebody to, get these loans and find out who's truant on these loans, and if you don't know what percentage are truant and which people are actually not paying you, that'd be tough to do.
That's true, yeah. I mean, so you'll see a lot of times finance will have their own kind of document management systems, their own kind of systems where they're keeping track of data that's also in contracts, like when's the start, when's the stop, and when's all the money coming through, so great. I think lastly, and this will move into kind of us showing you a little bit of the product before bringing Jerry up here, but can you guys think of any ways that you would use AI or Evisort's AI to kind of solve some of the problems in either use case?
think it'd be helpful to show them what AI can do on contract.
Okay, I think it was about to.
So, if we maybe going a little off track, it's not necessarily part of the use case, but I'm curious, what would Evisort do with the merger agreement? So when the potential acquirer proposes the terms of a deal, is Evisort able to kind of render any analysis or judgment on that?
Okay, so are you talking about the due diligence process of going through their contract beforehand? Or are you talking about analyzing the type of document itself, like like the merger agreement itself?
Yeah, the actual substantive merger agreement.
Okay, yeah. So for the substantive merger agreement, what one simple way that we'll be able to help is we'll show you from the document view page, where we've actually got an OCR version of the document, so you're able to, highlight the text and Control F. But all of the key data points in the contract, once entered into the system, are automatically extracted and viewable. So you've got the party names, the dates, and then your key provisions right there to the side. So instead of having to scroll through and go to look at your merger agreement, right on the side will say indemnification, limitation of liability, governing law, just the key ones you want to see. And then to go a step further, if you wanted to kind of look at maybe other offers or other merger agreements you've seen to benchmark, and we'll show you this in the kind of the contract review page, but you're able to search at the provisionary level. So let's say in particular you're worried about the indemnification provision of this merger agreement they offered you, and you want to see what are some others we've done in the past. You can actually go through and by using the metadata tags, parse through and kind of do a pivot table level search where you're saying, show me just the merger agreements, maybe just in the last 2 years, and maybe choose 5 or 6 parties of the people who you want to see. But then you can go to the next step and say, and then show me just the indemnification provision. And there you're able to, at that one screen, scan through and compare these different provisions and see what's market and what you would want to agree to it, what maybe you want to push back.
And every client or customer would have access to kind of the full data set or history of, as you said, previous deals or agreements, or do you guys kind of parcel out access in terms of you get the entire universe of every indemnification provision we've ever seen versus you only get.
Oh yeah. So that's within your own internal document. So this is a customer, which would be a client, which would be a company. This is this company's contracts. So you're able to do this within your own contracts to have a better idea of what you've done historically. So we're not giving you access to every client we've ever had's contracts.
So a specific trust got a merger agreement and they've never done a deal before, a M&A deal before. They wouldn't really have kind of a pre-existing history of other.
I can jump in the answer.
Yeah.
We download the entire SEC database, so we have 9 million indemnification provisions. If you ever hear like a partner say, "Hey, what's market?"
Right.
We're actually launching a website, open source website with in conjunction with a couple research universities to talk about what is market. And so you can go in and say, I want to break it down by this industry, this type of document, the size of the deal, look at the type of indemnification provision, classified into 5 different types. But I think that type of knowledge traditionally has been reserved for law firms because they've seen so many of these companies don't go through M&A that often. We think that should be available to everybody. And so we think that that's going to change our industry because now anybody can log in, even a law school, and go on and see 9 million indemnification provisions. And so it's going to create a balance of power, I think, between like big banks and like smaller companies if you're looking at things like interest rates and risk ratios.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, no problem, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think, just before we bring Jerry up here, what we're talking about, that's for public, Jerry just alluded to is that there are ways to get data from the universe of public documents that are out there. And you can do that by leveraging things like the SEC database, which keeps track of all these things and makes those public. As it relates to your internal documents, there are ways to leverage the data that we've talked about to solve some of the use cases that were mentioned in the case study. So if we take the idea of an unstructured database full of documents, something that might look a little bit like this in a shared drive or a Google Drive or a SharePoint or something like that. What would happen is that the AI would go through and analyze each contract for the specific data points that are important to your company. So examples of some of these data points are who are the parties to this contract, when does it expire, when was it effective, what's the term, things like that. I mean, all this data is being tagged and assigned to every specific contract. There's no manual work involved. And then what you can do with that is run advanced queries for specific contracts based on your search terms, but what you can also do is run reports across the organization. So if we take one of our use case examples as a jumping off point, how do I look at all of the ways that I'm potentially exposed to liability across all of these documents that I don't currently have knowledge of? So that's maybe the inventor's den use case. So what you can do is you can search by maybe a specific contract type. So I only want to see my services agreements, for example. And what we've done is to classify each document by what kind of agreement it is. And so for the Pacific use case, it might be I just want to see loan documents or employment agreements. If I take services agreements as an example, this is going to narrow the documents that I see based on what I want to look at. And then if I want to just see, for example, my limitation of liability provisions across my documents, then I can do that really quickly by running a report. This is the list of services agreements that we currently have that are active. And if I click on the documents with provisions and brief description, then I get a sense of what the provisions are for these specific contracts. And I can scroll down this page, see which contracts apply, and I can also compare provisions across documents. And so I get a sense of what I've agreed to as it concerns liability. Yes?
The classification process, did you guys do it manually, or was it like supervised or unsupervised learning?
A little bit of both, actually. So to train any model, whether it's classification or a data extraction model, requires some level of training data. But there are techniques that you can use so you don't have to supervise every single bit, or every collection, piece of collection of training data. So you can use some unsupervised techniques. For example, if we take limitation of liability, I have this huge universe of provisions out there in my contracts, and some of them are different, some of them look a lot like each other. And limitation of liability provisions might have some similarities across all my contracts. So what I could do is use some unsupervised AI techniques to pull just those ones that look alike, and I can say, yes, these are limitation of liability provisions, and they should be tagged as such. And that helps me more quickly generate a corpus of training data that can train my AI so that it starts to pick up the features in the text that tells me that this is a limitation of liability provision, so it can predict in the next contract or on my broader universe of contracts where my LOL provisions are. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Yeah, so this is one way. If we go back to the idea of market, getting an idea for my own internal organization what I've agreed to. So it's also helpful in negotiating new contracts. So this is just one example of kind of the ways that you can slice this data and cut it to your advantage. But there are obviously lots of other use cases, and each company is a little bit different. But I think what we can do at this point is bring Jerry up and just talk a little bit about the company, and if you guys have questions, like I think we have mostly students here, so if you guys talk about like how we started the company, what it's like to be an entrepreneur at HLS. I guess I'll kick it off by just asking you, Jerry, how did you come up with the idea? What was it like starting a company out of HLS? And what are some of the most exciting things that have come out of the whole experience?
Yeah, first, let me apologize for wearing a suit. I have to go to a meeting after this with a pretty big bank, and so they wear suits. When I work with our own team, and so we wear shorts to go to work because it's weird. We work in legal technology, and so we are a startup. Like my data scientists, they don't. It's really funny to see a data scientist talk about, oh, your limitation liability clauses are really varied in your document set. How do you know what a limitation liability clause is? It's fantastic to see the technology folks and the lawyers and our clients come together and work together. It's very, very, I think, new in our industry. So apologies for the monkey suit. What you asked me for was, how was it like being a student starting the company? I would encourage folks at HLS to go over to the Harvard Innovation Lab. I knew I kind of didn't want to be a practicing lawyer in a big law firm. I think 6 weeks after I became a winnow. My co-founder Jake was my section, and we both felt the same way. And so we did like everything under the sun to not be a lawyer. We interned at BCG for summer. So over J-term, we memorized how to do case studies. I didn't know how to use Excel before that, so it was falling in the deep end. And then I worked at Credit Suisse in banking afterwards. I tried to do every risk-averse thing you could do besides starting a company. The whole time, we're building these models already. Me and my co-founder, who was on PhD track at MIT, we're building out these models, bringing it to professors, bringing it to alumni, and we're getting the reactions of, wow, what Riley just showed right there, that's about $2 million worth of work if you're doing it on all of Disney's contract, for example. And people are paying law firms a lot of money. And so while I was trying to do everything I can to make my parents not mad that they helped me get my JD, we are hearing from the market, this is a huge pain. I'm kind of curious from the folks in the room, like, do you guys know this already? Because I know the legal industry has changed since I was a 1L. When I was a 1L, and I went to professors in contracts law, actually I went to your professor, who won't say his name. He said, what would be awesome when you're analyzing a contract is if you can tell me if there's consideration in the contract. And I thought, I have never read a contract without consideration. Because there's a price and there's a product, or there's a service. And so that's very theoretical, right? I think today, this is the first ever legal tech symposium at Harvard Law. I'm collaborating with professors at Columbia, at Stanford. We're seeing like the industry change. And so I'm curious, has anyone like heard of legal tech? Has everyone heard of legal tech? I'm just wondering, at the academic level, where are we today as an industry? Any thoughts? You're nodding?
I think everyone's heard of legal tech at this point.
Yeah, that's cool. When we first started, I thought I was like discovering something. Because I would go over to MIT, they all know this. And they've been doing this, I had a startup when I was an undergrad. We did this in 2013. And so I came to law school, especially the folks who are 5 years out. This is new. I talked to law firm partners. My law firm's Cooley, I'm their client. And we're starting to do some work with them. And for some of the lawyers in M&A, this is seen as a threat at some level, because that's a lot of the work that junior associates would do. One of the questions they ask me is, okay, so if you take away due diligence, how do junior lawyers, how do they train themselves? How do they see enough examples where they could be a lawyer when they're a fifth year? And I guess my question is, like, why do you need to see 10,000 examples in due diligence in a sort of spreading the contracts context? Why does a junior lawyer need to do that to understand what a limitation liability clause is? I have a PhD data scientist who came from Iran who can tell you the 5 different versions of the indemnification clause, because he's built models for each, right? And so my point is, it's interesting as a young graduate of Harvard Law to be talking to C-level CLOs, CFOs of Fortune 500 companies. Everyone's trying to do something like this now. I'm actually here in town for an RFP with a major bank. It's a $10 million project. The industry is completely changing. And I'll leave on that note in terms of my random rant. But if you have any questions on what we're seeing, curious to hear your thoughts.
How granular can you go into categorizing each provision? You showed us the limitation of liability. Can you go a little more deeper and then like, oh, limitation of liability, something is triggered only when this and this and that happen, and stuff like that?
Yeah, so in data science, there's bigrams and trigrams. What that is every 2 words and every 3 words. So in the Disney example, we can help them track most favored nation provisions. Those are clauses inside of words. But that's how detailed it can get. We can pull out the termination clause and tell you, is it termination for cause or for convenience? And also, how long before the contract actually terminates do you need to write an email to this following person? And we can automate that entire process. Go ahead.
Do you guys integrate with like commonly used contract management tools like DocuSign or something like that on the intake tool? That would be more of like an enterprise application.
Yeah.
Like...
We do, and we integrate with over 50. So DocuSign, EchoSign, Salesforce. We're building our integration with iManage right now. The goal would be that for the end user, they don't even know there's AI. They just log in. A document goes into a folder. They have the data. Who cares about the tech as long as it's accurate? Right? And so, especially in a supply chain context, like Oracle and SAP, these big companies have been there for a long time. We're launching partnerships with these companies.
One of the first use examples listed in the case report were medical records and doctor's notes, and so that was automatically a warning bell for me of privacy issues. So I'm just wondering how you typically address your clients' privacy concerns.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because a lot of my clients are both doing diligence on us and they're also the buyer. So like the head of privacy of a company is actually my client, and we're helping them look for GDPR compliance clauses. The way we deal with that is we can, not getting too technical, we can create basically private instances where we're basically working for their company as almost like a consultant, and we're building their version of Evisort that's custom to them. And so I'm here meeting with I think the 3 largest banks in town. Each of them will have their own version of Evisort internally. So it's like we're never leaving the firewall. But,
so how customized is the product for every different client, and how long does it generally take you to customize product?
yeah, can you show the slide with just the provisions? Out of the box, we can do over 50 different data points at a 95% or higher accuracy rate. And so for most clients, it takes 3 days to get started. If you want to do something custom, we can do that, but it's going to be custom work. And to add like a provision, it takes about 2 days. So not a huge lift in corporate America's timeline. You have a question?
What happens to the 5% non-accurate bit? Like
Great question.
Who takes care of that?
We spend 80% of our time on the 5%.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what we're trying to solve for.
Yeah.
This slide is not very technical, but if my data scientists were here, and if I'm presenting this in front of an RFP, we have a confidence interval behind every data point. So we say, hey, your party name is 96% accurate, 96% accurate. Your term of agreement is 60% accurate. And what we can do is we can basically take 1,000 documents and say, okay, maybe instead of using 10 people, you can use 2 people. And they're looking only at the ones where there's exposure. You can save 80% of your cost. We were talking about this at dinner last night. This goes into our pricing model, right? If you're looking at Fidelity and all their 401k documents, that's a $100 million problem that we're solving. You don't need to do 100%. If you do 80%, that's still $80 million.
So compared to the human performance, like how much are you higher? Like I don't know if you have now lawyers looking at.
Human performance at a data entry level, on average, is about like 72% accuracy.
Okay.
So we're actually better than human. Because not everyone went to Harvard Law School. A lot of folks are just banging these things as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Cool.
You mentioned that you had clients both law firms as well as non-law firms.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, one, did you start out with law firms and then branch out? And two, I'm very curious about the sales cycle at law firms versus businesses.
Good question. I'm curious what's your background, if I may?
I work over in executive education and how you find people. When you guys go out into the legal world and come back and then realize that whole business school thing and all these different issues they're talking about intersect with law, and you come to exec ed and you face these very questions.
Yeah, David Hawkins is a good mentor of mine, by the way, so that might say hi. We started off with law firms when I was still here, and we're quickly turned the U-turn ASAP. Because we talked to managing partners of almost every M 100 law firm, and they would the first question they'll ask you is the accuracy rate question. That's the first question they'll ask you. So instead of saying, hey, what can you actually do? How can you actually build a business? They'll say, what happens if it breaks? And I think that's very much reflective of their training because they're issue spotting. But when I go to their clients, especially the CFOs of their clients, the question is, you can save me $80 million, how do I get started? And so we didn't start with law firms initially because of that cultural gap. In the last 6 months, that's really changed. I have law firms calling me now, which is new.
And do you find that the culture of purchasing is different in a law firm environment as opposed to a company?
Very different. It's very academic, very research driven. You get 10 managing partners of practice groups in a room. Each person is asking about the edge cases within their departments. And we spend the whole time doing a science experiment. I figured out a trick to that though.
Yeah.
You sell to their procurement department. You get their backroom service to buy it, and do a proof of concept with their vendor agreements, and say, hey, it already works on your documents. Why don't we do a land and expand model?
And do you find that the lawyers at the firms know the questions to ask? They know what they don't know. In other words, do you find that
companies, businesses that are buying the product and they have a whole sales cycle set up, a whole department to do this, and they have experts. And you find that law firms are asking the same questions, or what kind of questions are they asking? And are they asking what you would consider the right questions? Forget about whether or not you're going to make the sale. And then what kind of support do you offer law firms versus companies?
Law firms ask the harder questions that I think are wrong. And it's about what happens when you're using foreign languages. What happens if, in the edge cases of edge cases, a loan agreement refers to an exhibit? How do you find that? And for me, I say, well, I don't even try to find that. That's why you have a business model. But for us, we can find the normal ones using either supervised or unsupervised learning models that you can then quickly check. In our system, you can review 1,000 documents in like 5 minutes because the language is a boilerplate language. We can find things like that. And so part of it is like me coaching them as a product manager, saying, I get where you're coming from, but here's another way to look at that. And some of the best law firms in the world are now starting to work with us because they have hired internal sort of innovation managers who come from e-discovery backgrounds, and now we're playing both. To answer your question about service, we help them train the models because I don't think a law firm can just train their own model. There's a lot of complexity in terms of how you weigh feature sets that I think is better retained by data scientists. We're doing a ton. We're running out.
A couple, maybe 1 or 2 months.
So I can't see there's a big light bulb in my face. One last question.
So, I'm trying to figure out how automated the process is. For example, let's say I want to use the product for an M&A deal, and I'm trying to do a due diligence report, and I say, can you control, I give you some tools, and do you give me a summary?
Yeah, we create cover sheets with a drop-down menu.
Okay.
So you can say, I want to look at contracts over $100,000 that are in Singapore that have these types of clauses. Here's a report. I want to filter out redundancies and see only ones that are abnormal. And that takes like 30 seconds.
I just have a question about the product. So is Evisort capable of analyzing the substance of the provisions? So I see that you're capable of identifying a specific type of provision, not just a specific type of document. And can you actually say that something is right or wrong after terms and termination terms?
We can, and that's actually easier of a problem. This is a harder problem, but if I can find a term provision, the termination reason, then our client can tell us, hey, we usually don't like for convenience, we like for clause. That's our standard fallback position. And the clients can tune that to match their internal contracting policies. I'll stay around for like a couple minutes afterwards if anybody want to chat. But so you have like last
that's fine.
Okay. Thanks guys.
Thanks everyone for coming. We have 2 more events this week. Tomorrow, get more Jerry. He'll be on a panel with the General Counsel of the Patriots, General Counsel of a couple other Fortune 500 companies, and that's happening tomorrow at noon. And then we also have a final event on Friday.
Yeah, that's going to be a panel looking specifically at natural language processing technologies and how they work in law. We're going to have the co-founder and CEO of Ravel Law, the co-founder and CEO of Legit AI, and General Counsel, and actually an in-house Harvard Law fellow who focuses on issues of technology and justice. So,
thanks, guys.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming out. Really appreciate it.